Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited and delighted to welcome Nathan to our channel. Nathan is CEO of Robusta Dev. Robusta automates Kubernetes monitoring, and I will let Nathan later on tell us more about it. So, Nathan, first, so nice of you to be on our channel. Please tell us about you. Where did you grow up, and how did you become CEO of this dynamic startup, Robusta?
Thank you for having me. It's been quite a journey. And just a disclaimer before I give my background, these stories are always kind of putting the pieces together backwards after it happened. Um, you can you have to live life forwards, but then you can only make sense of it backwards.
Oh,
So what I mean by that is, especially when you look at your own career journey and where you're going and where you want to be, a lot of the stuff that happens is often accidental, and a lot of it is opportunities that came up, and a lot of it is stuff that you didn't imagine when you took that first step where the path would take you. So I'll give my story in a second, but just for everyone out there, I think it's important to realize that these stories are never really planned and are never kind of predictable, and it's really just about those like one step at a time, then where you end up. So the first step for me started when I was 14 years old and I got involved in an open source project, GNOME Linux, a desktop environment for Linux. So that's like the stuff that draws like all the common applications, like the photo editing app and like a bunch of other stuff. And the thing that draws that like bit, that bar around your window with the minimize button, like all that stuff on Linux is part of either GNOME or KDE, or it used to be anyway. Now there are alternatives. But I got started with the open source project when I was 14, and then I was lucky to be sponsored by Red Hat and Canonical and to go to a bunch of different hackathons. And then for a long time, I finished high school. I went on, I did a bunch of other stuff. For about 10 years, I actually didn't do that much with open source. What I did was I worked on a lot of commercial projects and did a lot in cybersecurity, wrote a lot of code, did some stuff with eBPF back when it was just BPF without an E, and it really did a lot of hands-on, like, so I guess for 10 years, really focused on like low-level hands-on development, writing a lot of code, C, C++, whatever, a mix of things. And then eventually, I was at a cybersecurity startup and working on Kubernetes. And I just got sick of being called up and having my dinners interrupted by people who were on call and were running stuff in production and had questions. And eventually, I got so tired of it, I left my job and started Robusta. And I decided that there's, even though there are so many monitoring tools out there, right, there's a bit of a gap in between the data that we collect and then what you actually use and what you see.
true.
Something like 99.99% of all the data that you ever collect is never seen. Like if you think of all the logs you're collecting from applications, all the metrics, most of the monitoring data you collect is never ever seen, which is okay because you're collecting it just in case and you go back and so on. But when there is an incident, it's really hard to find the relevant data. So we started we started Robusta with the goal of solving that problem and solving it first and foremost with open source solutions, and then later on a commercial platform. And it's a weird thing to say, but I think we're the only monitoring company in the world that started with the goal of not collecting a single more piece of data, but rather making
That's
sense of
that's
what we
truly
already
weird.
had.
If you just for the clarity, what was the year when you first heard about Kubernetes?
I first heard about Kubernetes. Let me see. So it would have been 3 to 4 years ago now,
Okay.
and 3 to 4 years ago. So that would have been me. I guess we're in 2023 now. So I guess
That
that
was
would have been
before
20.
COVID. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Before COVID, a little bit before COVID, probably about half a year before COVID,
Hmm.
actually.
Okay.
And like I said, I had a ton of experience doing all this low level stuff, but I actually had zero cloud experience. I had never touched an EC2 instance or done anything on AWS, and I had never actually written a Docker container or a
Okay.
Docker file.
That's
And
interesting.
I felt like it was just a gap in my knowledge. So I had like all this cybersecurity knowledge, and I was already kind of bouncing around in my head ideas for startups. I didn't know what the idea would be, but I did want to go off and do something. And I said, what's the biggest area that I know nothing about where I'm really, really ignorant and I shouldn't be? And I said, okay, cloud. So I tried to bridge the gap like between, on the one hand, I wanted to go off and learn about cloud. On the other hand, I didn't want to go off and like be completely a fish out of water and have no idea what I was doing, not be useful to the company I was working for. So I looked for the intersection of those two. I said, okay, well, what if I went and I learned cloud, but I did it at a cybersecurity company where I do like all this low level eBPF stuff. And then it was a perfect fit because like I'd still be a little bit in my comfort zone. I'd be like able to be really valuable to the company, or like by writing low level code and eBPF and kernel stuff and what have you. But I also would be outside of my comfort zone, really have to push myself to really understand cloud. And I'd be like right in the thick of it. And I wouldn't be able to do my job if I didn't understand cloud. So I tried to pick an opportunity. I think this is also a common theme along my career. When I make the next step, I've never made the next step based on how much money I will make, not a single time. In fact, I've often taken the worst of two options. When I went to that startup where I worked on Kubernetes and then cloud, I had an alternative offer from Microsoft to come and work at the group that then Asaf, I'm blinking on the name, but Asaf Rappaport, who now is the CEO of Wiz, he was at Microsoft then, and he tried to recruit me personally, and I had a really good offer, and I turned it down because I didn't feel that would be the place that I would learn the most. So throughout my career, I've always tried to take the path that will lead me to learn the most, rather than the path that gives me the most money, and I think that's paid off a lot.
That's a great career advice, by the way. So I think that should I will highlight it too. Now, you touched upon, thinking about starting up even before you came to know about Kubernetes. And I have been monitoring and I have been in touch with Israeli startup scene for some time now. And I'm really very impressed, or should I say gobsmacked, by the number of startups coming from Israel and especially the quality of them. It is simply mind blowing. So, in your opinion, why Israel is so fertile for startups?
So there's the common theory, and this is like put forward by a book called Startup Nation. There's this really common theory that it has to do with Israeli intelligence and the IDF, and it has to do with all these other things. And I'm going to actually put forward a very different theory, which is that it's about societal expectations, and it's because there's no expectation that you don't do a startup. The expectation is like, and what I mean by that is in many countries, if you go home one day and you say, "Hey, mom, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to work without a salary for 6 months and I'm going to work on the startup and I have no idea if we're ever going to get funded and I have no idea if anyone is going to ever use this thing and I'm leaving my job at Microsoft where I'm getting paid really good and I have a fantastic career path." In almost every country I know, your mom slash wife slash husband slash partner will say, "Why are you doing that?" And that doesn't sound like a good idea. Are you sure that's a smart career move? And in Israel, there's this unique cultural phenomena where people say, "I've always wanted to do that. Oh, I'm so proud of you. That's a fantastic idea."
That's
And
amazing.
I think part of the reason for that does now go back to the fact that every Israeli does mandatory military service, and it's because Israelis don't have this common like path that you're supposed to follow in life. And what I mean is, I actually grew up at a young age in the U.S. before I moved to Israel. And in the U.S., there's kind of this path that you're on from the moment you were born. So you're born, and then you go to kindergarten, and then eventually you go to elementary school. And in elementary school, you're focused on getting to the best high school. And in high school, you're focused on college acceptance. And you go to college, and in college, you're focused on getting the summer internships that are going to lead to a job. And then based on the summer internships and based on how you did in college, then you're focused on getting the job. And there's like this progression, this path that you're supposed to follow. We always speak about paved paths now in development and in platform engineering, but there's this paved path for life in the US. And of course, I'm exaggerating. Many people don't do this, but there's kind of societal expectation in many countries that there's a path where you do things. And in Israel, for a variety of factors, there is no paved path because people will finish high school and then they go into the military. And then in the military, they're there for between 2 years to 7 years often. So like you're already out of sync. There's already you're on your own custom path. And then people often go off to like Thailand or take a vacation and travel abroad for a year after they finish because they want to break. And like all these things are culturally accepted. So in Israel, there isn't this expectation that like you follow each of these steps along the way and then now you just need to hit the next step. There's kind of this expectation like you'll do you and you'll do whatever and things work out. So I think that lack of expectation for like I should be at a 9 to 5 job. I should be doing whatever. Like that lack of expectation is really healthy because it means you can go off and do something else. Combined with the fact that there are enough success stories about startups that when you say that to your mom, she's like, "Oh, okay, you'll be the next software app reporter, and the next Wiz, or the next Checkpoint, the next Mario Snapped, whatever." And all those are common household names in Israel. So there's kind of this expectation, like, yeah, okay, you'll do that, of course, like, and that could work out. Whereas in other countries, it's like you're stepping off the paved path, and there isn't this familiarity with people who have stepped off the paved path and made it really big. Or if there is, it's like the exception. Like, okay, yeah, Steve Jobs dropped out of high school, Bill Gates dropped out, but no one we know or like have ever spoken to has done that. And like, so surely that's not a good idea. Whereas in Israel, it's like, oh yeah, your cousin Moshe did that, and now he's a millionaire from a startup, which I think money is a bad reason to do a startup. But there's this acceptance and this understanding that you can do those other things, and even if the startup fails, it often turns out well. So I think those factors are a big part of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's amazing, um, and I believe the Israeli government also helps out with some of the startup scene. The whole vibe is towards the startup, right?
Yeah, so there are some grant programs and some other things. I don't, for me, that doesn't weigh heavily in it. Like, it may. I'll tell you why. It's one of those things where there has been this investment behind the scenes, and it's very possible. So, okay, yeah, you probably are right, because I'm thinking back to something that I heard recently from a VC, from a venture capitalist, investor in live Israeli startups. The original Israeli funds, when people first started investing in startups in Israel, it was actually bootstrapped by the Israeli government. The Israeli government wanted to bring in investment in startups and start up the startup ecosystem here in Israel. And they said to a bunch of VCs, to a bunch of investment firms, they said, we'll give you the best deal of your life. For every dollar that you invest in startups, we'll invest a dollar of our own, and we won't take any other return, or we'll take a very, very small portion.
Awesome. Yeah,
And for any investor, that was like a no-brainer, right? So
yeah,
that did help start it. So it's interesting because I would never experience any of that, or I would never even know about that if I hadn't had this conversation.
mhm,
Yet you're probably right. There might have
yeah.
not been any startup ecosystem without that
Okay,
early boots.
makes sense. Now, just out of curiosity, because I have done some interviews with other startups and their CEOs and founders, they have said to me, and there is one common thing which they all have said to me, that one of the hardest part was to come up with the name of the company. So, what about you? Was it hard for you to come up with this name Robusta, or why did you name it Robusta, in other words?
So sorry. I mean, it wasn't hard for us. We had two. I Here's the truth. Okay, I like coffee. I've gotten here. You probably can't see that with the blur, but I have here a coffee mug with a picture of a coffee on. So with a picture of coffee on it, I'm drinking coffee out of a coffee mug with coffee with the coffee plant on the side. I got from the Kew Botanical Gardens in London, and
Mhm.
there are two popular types of coffee: Arabica and Robusta, and I just like coffee, so I always thought it would be cool to name a startup after coffee, which is perhaps a bad reason. So we polled a bunch of friends and family, and we said, should we call the startup Arabica or should we call it Robusta? And people thought Robusta was a better name because it sounds robust, and that's it. I think a name is actually relatively unimportant. Like, you shouldn't give your startup a name that like means a bad word in some language. Like, a name can harm you, but I don't think a good name can help you really in any meaningful way.
Okay,
Like, don't take a name that's gonna like take away from you in Google or will have like a bad connotation. But other than that, I don't think a name is really important.
right. Okay. And so, while we are on the topic of Robusta, where do you see Robusta from in 2 to 5 years?
I mean, we want to start taking market share from Datadog and Dynatrace and the big players. I mean, I think what we've seen is this big trend as an industry to using Prometheus. And I think now for a lot of companies, the Prometheus stack or Prometheus-like options. I say Prometheus-like because there's Victoria Metrics and there's Thanos and there's Mimir and there's Azure Managed Prometheus and AKS Managed Prometheus. Like, there are all these other Prometheus-like options, but all those options I'm calling Prometheus. So we've seen that the Prometheus stack has emerged as the de facto standard for cloud native and for Kubernetes. And really, people have voted with their feet and said, we want Prometheus. And I think we've spoken about this a little bit, that in many companies, even if you have Datadog or Dynatrace or New Relic, all these other tools, someone brings in Prometheus kind of behind the scenes. often for other reasons like auto scaling. And then
Yeah.
the end users and the people in your company, they often end up going to Prometheus and Grafana and these other systems instead of ever opening up that really expensive observability tool that you're paying for. So we've seen in the market that people are voting with their feet for Prometheus. And Prometheus and the Prometheus ecosystem in Grafana and like the open source stack is fantastic, but there's some areas there that are still missing to get to that like Datadog or Dynatrace level capabilities. So where
On
we see
yeah.
ourselves in, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, sorry. So, you know, just to highlight you at this point, I'm based in Sydney, Australia, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, and every week I meet with different stakeholders in different companies and businesses across the industry here in Australia. And one of the common theme here when it comes to Kubernetes monitoring or even the infrastructure monitoring is that every company has multiple tools for monitoring. Few of them have the tools which you mentioned. I'm not going to name any products here, but high-end products, very expensive. But the problem they face is that they have all the tools in the world, but they don't know what to monitor, how to consolidate them. And we call it monitoring mess. So how do you see Robusta resolving this monitoring mess in a market like Australia where they have all these tools?
So that's the problem that we solve. We work with some really big enterprises. I I I don't. So we actually have some stuff that we're going to announce soon, and some great companies whose names you're familiar with who have agreed to be reference customers for us.
Mhm.
I don't want to share anything just yet on the call because we're still finalizing a few things.
Sure.
But we work with some really big companies in big in like industrial and big industries around medicine, around banking, around fintech. And with a lot of these companies that we work with, they have multiple tools, but they still have this really, really big gap in observability. And the way that this usually manifests is you have, let's say, a DevOps or a platform team or an infrastructure team that's responsible for the clusters and giving that as a service often in these large enterprises to thousands of developers or to hundreds of developers. And those developers have all these tools, but at the end of the day, they get some alert in Slack or Microsoft Teams or Opsgenie or PagerDuty. They get some alert about an issue with their microservice running on Kubernetes. And you know what they do? They open a Jira ticket for the DevOps engineer to investigate. So all the tools are there, but no one's using them. And
Correct.
that's really a shame because I don't have a problem with paying $2 million a year to Datadog. But if I'm paying $2 million a year to Datadog, I damn well better be getting the value out of it. And my developers should be using that and they should be seeing the value. And if they're not, if they're going behind the scenes and they're pulling in Prometheus and now the DevOps team is installing Grafana and no one is happy and we don't have the solutions, then why am I paying $2 million a year? So that's what we see and what our customers see as a major gap in the market. And I'm going to take a controversial stance here and I'm going to say you don't need to collect any more data. You have enough data today. And you have enough data. It doesn't even matter if you're in Prometheus. I use like storing your metrics in Prometheus, or if you have Elasticsearch. I know that's logs, but sometimes people also use it for some APM
Yeah.
like stuff. And it doesn't matter if you have Datadog. It doesn't matter if you have Dynatrace. I don't care what you have. All I care about is the end result. When there's an incident, do you know where to look fast, and can you solve the problem? And can you empower developers to do this shift left and for developers to monitor their own stuff? And developers do not need to know Kubernetes or not know everything about Kubernetes, but they should be able to monitor the application specific stuff. If there's an application error, they shouldn't need to go to you to get application logs, or they shouldn't need to go to you to understand why a pod is crashing if it's an application issue. And if you can't do that, then I think you need to rethink the investments in the monitoring stack. And I know that perhaps I have a controversial opinion here, but
No, I think that makes sense. That totally resonates with what I see day to day. Um, in my talks with other stakeholders in different companies. So I think that resonates with it. Now, well, I mean, I think these days no discussion is complete without the mention of generative AI and large language models or LLMs. As you can already tell, that generative AI has stolen the limelight from all the other technologies, including Kubernetes. And so, do you think that Kubernetes is still relevant in this era and in the coming days or years?
I do. I think that while generative AI is more trendy right now, let's assume for a second, and I think there is some truth to this. Let's assume for a second, though, that generative AI is not just a trend, can really provide long-term value here. And there are issues that we're going to work out. But I think it really is providing real value to people.
Mhm.
And I mean, we've done a lot of stuff around this as well. So I do believe in the value, and I do believe also in the challenges around hallucinations and all the other part. I think we're going to work some of this out as we move forward. So let's assume for a second, um, play with me. Let's assume that generative AI is going to change the world. As a consequence of that, we're going to have more applications than ever running, and we're going to need to still scale those applications. We're going to need to run them on infrastructure. We're going to need to do all sorts of stuff with those applications to get them running. Even if you look at OpenAI themselves, OpenAI has one of the largest Kubernetes clusters in the world. OpenAI is running, every time you use ChatGPT, you're running on top of Kubernetes infrastructure. And every time that you go and you generate an app, even using generative AI, or you create, if you create an app with generative AI, that still has to run somewhere. And if that's successful, you're going to need to scale that. You're going to need to do all the scaling, health checks, and all these other things that Kubernetes brings. So I think it's more relevant than ever. Um, and if you don't buy into generative AI, then of course it's also relevant. But I started out as a big skeptic here, but I've actually come around and we've made some really big investments in generative AI, and it seems like for our customers and for surprisingly big enterprises, there seems to be a lot of real value here that we can give. I
Yeah.
always thought that generative AI would first be adopted by small companies, and then
Mhm.
by mid-market, and then by enterprises. And it seems like we're skipping over the mid-market here. So
Yeah.
startups are using generative AI. The mid-market is very, very cautious.
Mhm.
And then fintech is and banking is actually one of the major adopters of generative AI. And
Correct. Yeah.
there seems to be this big fear here also in certain traditional industries that if you don't adopt generative AI, then you're going to be left behind. That's going to be a competitive disadvantage. So we surprisingly started our own journey with generative AI is we did a little small open source project that can take your Prometheus alerts and then using generative AI and OpenAI, it can tell you why they fired. And
Mm.
then that took off just like rocket fire, like a rocket ship. They, and then we went and we like started looking at it a little bit. And we thought, okay, well, maybe we'll build out here a commercial offering. And surprisingly, we jumped straight to enterprise. Some enterprise companies came to us, say, okay, we like what you're doing, and we want an enterprise version of this. We want to connect it to all sorts of other data. We want to do all sorts of things, like also with our own data. And we built out the first version of what's eventually going to be Robusta AI, with a few enterprise companies, some of the biggest companies in the world as design
Okay.
partners. And we had really good results. Like I started out as a skeptic and I came around to a believer by the end of it. And
Okay.
our partners said to us, okay, yeah, we really want this. And like, okay, how can we get this into production faster? And now we're starting to trickle that back down. And we just announced last month the first private beta for Robusta AI, which is taking your Prometheus alerts, taking your Kubernetes environment, and then using AI to investigate issues there.
Very
And
nice.
the private beta is now open to anyone who wants. So anyone can message me after. Still is private, but we'll add you if you send us an email.
Awesome.
So anyone can message me on LinkedIn afterwards.
So, on that very point, if someone wants to learn about Robusta or you, or if someone has more questions around it, how they can reach out to you?
So you can add me on LinkedIn and message me. You can also email Natan, Natan, at robusta.dev, robusta.dev. Um, and I try and reply to everything. I'm happy people add me. I try and reply to every message. Sometimes I'm a little bit slow. It could take me a day or two to get around, but I try and really reply to everything. And I love to hear from people. And you can message me on Twitter as well. My direct messages are open. So I think I'm doing some weird stuff with the settings. So I hope people can still message me. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Awesome. And I believe that you must have some other interest outside of Kubernetes Robusta. So, do you have any hobbies you want to share with us?
I do. It's getting squeezed out because I have a 5-month-old baby. So between that and the startup, now there's less and less time for other things. But my big passion is gardening, and
Mhm.
specifically growing vegetables and especially tomatoes, and then growing tropical plants, which I mean taking house plants and then growing them outside, which you can do in Israel, which is cool.
That's awesome. And how did you develop this interest?
So my mother, my parents, and especially my mother, have a house that has a small little garden in the back, and my mother really wanted to grow roses there, and there's some sentimental reasons there also with her father who grew roses, and she really wanted to grow roses there, and the problem is that there's almost no sun, and you can't grow roses in.
Yeah, true.
So asked me to help out there with the garden, and I had to go and like figure out, okay, what can I grow here that will still be colorful and will still like kind of provide maybe not the roses, but kind of the type of feeling that she wants in the garden. So I took her to a bunch of different places to see different types of gardens, and then she really connected to a specific tropical garden I took her to where there were a lot of colorful plants.
Very
Um,
nice. Very
and yeah, so that's how it got started.
awesome. Very, very interesting. And before I wrap up, any message you want to give to the viewers? Anything at the end you want to say?
Yeah. So one challenge with developing open source software is that often people just they try it out, it works or it doesn't work, and they never speak to you. And as a project maintainer, that's like I wish I heard from people. I know also what to focus on more. I know if there are things that are unclear in the documentation that we can fix. And then also for the people who are adopting, sometimes people adopt with a really specific use case. And like if someone said to me, oh, I have this use case, and I put them at a specific tutorial, and I say, here, this tutorial is your exact use case, copy paste this configuration. But instead they're coming in fresh and like they don't even always know that or we haven't done a good enough job saying, oh, here's this exact tutorial for this specific use case. So one thing that I really like to do that's uncommon with open source projects is we like to do onboarding with our users. We like to jump on calls with our open source users or our commercial users, of course, and get to know them and to just say like, okay, hey, what are you doing? And then, okay, yeah, let me show you the resources for setting that up. How did it go? Did everything work well? Is there something that's missing that you want us to add to the roadmap? So I probably jump on dozens of calls like that a week with different users or different people who are thinking about adoption, or even people who just have questions like, okay, I heard about Robusta. Does it integrate with Grafana Mimir? Does it make sense to use if I have no Kubernetes environment and using Docker Compose? To which my answer will be, hell no. That's not what we do. We're system
Yeah.
for you. But I'd love to, so we like to jump on a lot of these calls and to hear from people or to have them reach out and speak to us about their use cases. And I think it's mutually beneficial. So it's a little bit of a weird thing that we do.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from people and see how we
That's
can
very
help out.
generous of you for your time. I think that is quite generous because not every open source project does that. So really, I think that's a very generous offer.
Well, it's beneficial for us. I mean, I learn
Absolutely.
what we can improve about the onboarding. I learn where the documentation isn't clear. I learn what features people want and what we should put in the roadmap. Like I'm doing it to. I mean, I believe in doing it, but I'm also being a little bit selfish because it helps us back into our
Yeah,
roadmap. So
it goes both ways, definitely. Well,
don't feel that I'm doing. Don't feel shy about asking because I'm not doing something like just out that like
yeah,
I benefit from it too. So I really am happy to do it.
yeah, no, I'm more than sure people are going to bombard your inbox now. So be ready for that. And
Natan at robusta.dev, Natan at robusta.dev, and just put in the put in the title pod robusta onboarding or something, and then I'll know
uh,
exactly.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really, really interesting and refreshing. So thank you. Um, and for the viewers, I hope that you really enjoyed this. And I would highly suggest you try out robusta.dev and contact Nathan, as he mentioned very generously. And if you like this interview, please stay subscribed. And also, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and enjoy your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.